Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today I wanted to do a new video series for you talking about Morgan Le Fay versus Arjuna. So my chat wanted me to do this. This is actually a series that I have been thinking about doing almost comparative analysis between two units. I often see people do tier lists all the time. You guys know I'm not the hugest fan of them because they often lead to misconceptions. So one of the things I'm actually going to do for you guys here is go through this sort of line by line with you guys, comparing each of the units and talking about where I think one unit's stronger than the other and maybe some of the advantages one might have over the other. So, of course, since my chat wanted me to cover Arjuna, this is the one we're actually going to compare. I'm just kidding. We're going to do Arjuna Alter. That is the one that everyone wants. So, again, we are going to be comparing the two Berserkers. So Arjuna Alter has just now gotten his banner on NA here. This is going to be his first banner in several years. And again, this actually comes sooner than JP had expected it. So we've got a lot of people kind of asking, hey, is Arjuna Alter actually good? Do I still roll for him? Is he good in current year? And the answer to that is yes. Let no one tell you that Arjuna Alter is bad. There's definitely going to be some points to be made in Morgan Le Fay's case, but I think just kind of a quick summary here would be that Arjuna Alter will be more damaging than Morgan Le Fay. So at the end of the day, the advantage to Morgan Le Fay is going to be all of the other intangibles that she actually brings. So let's kind of look at them line by line here. So you guys can see here that Arjuna Alter has 11.6k attack. Morgan Le Fay has a little bit higher at 12k. And so right off the bat, that might be making you think, oh, you know, she's a little bit stronger. But the reality here is Arjuna Alter tends to have better steroids that help him out in that. So we'll kind of look at that here in a second as well. He only has 13.8 attack versus her 12.4. So again, she's a little bit more anemic on the health side of things, but that ends up not being too much of an issue for her. In fact, we might actually be able to say that Arjuna Alter might be the one that struggles a little bit more with health, just due to the team comps that you might be running him in, but certainly it might still be the case that Arjuna Alter will be fine as long as you protect him appropriately. So now as we come back here to Arjuna Alter, you're starting to look at his NP gain rate. Basically, that's going to be another big point of contention. He has 0.98 with the one arts card. Morgan Le Fay only has 0.53, which seems like it's a lot less, but she has the 2 arts card. So again, sometimes the deck matters here. So this is more in Morgan Le Fay's favor, actually, a little bit on the NP gain side of things. Arjuna Alter is going to have a much harder time generating Noble Phantasm with his cards because of this singular arts card only being 2 hit, versus Morgan Le Fay having double arts cards at 3 hit, and again, just still having a nice quick card there. The benefit to Arjuna Alter, though, is going to be the triple buster. This means that it's going to be more likely for you to actually form that gorilla chain there, that triple buster chain that allows him to just go totally oonga boonga. The advantage to him in that regard is also because he has the buster NP. This means that he's more likely to find these 2 cards that he would need in order to form that chain. He doesn't need each of the only 2 buster cards he has, like in Morgan Le Fay's case, if you're trying to pair it up with her NP. So that is going to be one of the issues that she might have, but certainly it's not a huge one, and actually, to a large degree, one of the ways in which she works so well in the Invincible comp is by the fact that not only does she have so much charge, but she also has these 2 arts cards to be able to form more arts chains with her appropriate supports. So that does kind of still work in her favor to some degree. Now again here, just looking at sort of the rest of the intangibles, he's lawful good and evil. This is a very kind of odd trait to have. Again, I believe it factors in his case as being both good and evil. So anything that affects good, anything that affects evil will affect him in that regard. So that could be good or bad, just depending on how it works out. Similarly, he is male. He's costume owning, divine spirit, hominidae, humanoid, immune to pigify, levitating, servant, and weak to intimate elish there. So he has, you know, some nice traits there like levitating and costume owning. But again, that is not unique to him in this case because also Morgan Le Fay has costume owning. She also is an Arturia face. She is Fey, she's humanoid, she's a sovereign, a servant, and weak to enemy. Oh, she actually has a lot fewer traits to be able to exploit against her if she's an enemy, but that doesn't necessarily help you too much as the player. So it really just kind of boils down to sort of what you can actually use in order to take advantage of it. Certainly things like Faye, you might be able to work in someone like Mabe that can actually help boost that, but that's going to be few and far between, so you're mostly going to be looking at instead just actually taking good supports with her and not trying to sort of boost her based off of one of her traits as much as you might with Arjuna Alter. So again here, we already talked about the deck. The hit counts are all stellar on Morgan Le Fay. With Arjuna Alter, again, the only real concern would be the arts card being low, and he does still have the high NP gain to help make up for that, so I'm not super concerned, but his extra attack is also a little bit low. Granted, we don't probably care too much in the scheme of overall card performance, because the main focus that you're going to be wanting to do with Arjuna Alter is going to be those Buster cards. And certainly now with some of the Buster supports that we have out, like Koyanskaya, you can actually get charged based off of using the Buster cards, so it's not the worst thing in the world still to even use the triple Buster as long as you have the right buffs with him. Now let's get on down to the skills here. Looking at Arjuna Alter's anti-evil unique charisma up here, it's a self-attack up for 3 turns, which is obviously strong in and of itself at 30% here at rank 10, but then it also increases his own damage against enemies with a debuff for 3 turns, except unremovable ones. So this doesn't apply to challenge quest ones. It doesn't apply to any of them that have that white box around them. So if you've ever seen a buff that looks kind of like that, that's how you know it's unremovable. It has the box around it. And so this actually won't work in his case if it's an unremovable debuff on himself. So really kind of weird in that regard, but still, it just depends on whatever the challenge gimmick is. That being said, Arjuna Alter does supply his own debuff later in his kit, so it's not the worst thing in the world, basically, as long as he has that on an enemy in some way, shape, or form. As long as the enemy isn't debuff immune, that's going to work in his favor. But the second the enemy is debuff immune or resists any of the debuffs that you try to put on them, that's where Arjuna Alter's damage really tanks. And the reason why is because he's losing out on that 50% power mod that he gets right there. There's been a lot said about this power mod over the years. Basically, this is kind of what propels him past a lot of the other Berserkers, but if he doesn't have this, he definitely gets knocked down a peg. So that is going to be something you're really going to have to pay attention to whenever you want to use him effectively. Still, you definitely can sort of still use an NP and then into a Brave Chain of Buster cards, and you can still get a lot of damage. It's just not going to be as much, especially because this does impact even his carding damage. It's not just a buff towards his NP. So losing that really is going to hurt him in a lot of ways. Looking at Morgan Le Fay, she also ends up having a charisma skill for her first one, and it increases the party's attack, so it's not selfish, but it's only 20%. So Arjuna Alter gets the 30% himself, Morgan Le Fay gets 20 to everyone, so basically almost 60%, but only if you care about the other units attack up. In some cases, maybe you're running an invincible comp with Castoria and Merlin in there, you're not going to care too much about their card damage. It's more going to be about how much can you get back to that NP and keep her damage pumping. But still, it will depend, and certainly stuff like that over a long duration fight can add up over time, so it's not the worst thing in the world. It's also then going to charge her own gauge by an additional 30%, so this is right here sort of matching one of Arjuna Alter's later skills that I'll talk about. So again, 30% right there for herself, and then it will reduce all enemies' defense for 3 turns by 30%. So right there, you don't have the 50% power mod, but you do have a 30% defense down for all enemies for 3 turns. That's solid. That's still a lot of damage. I think one of the only issues, if you're looking at it from a farming perspective, is that this doesn't get carried with you across nodes, across waves of a node. So if you try to pop this turn 1, the defense down that gets applied there doesn't get carried all the way to turn 3. It only applied to that first wave. But if you're running a double Koyanskaya setup, you're getting it back, and then you'll have it again for turn 3. So the only issue is that you would have the attack up basically go the full distance, but the defense down would get used on turn 1, and you wouldn't see it back until you got to pop the skill again on turn 3. But still, as long as you have the damage when you need it, that's all that really matters. So it's not a huge deal in her case. And again, if you're in a challenge quest and you're facing the same set of enemies over and over again, this is perfectly fine, and this is just going to boost everyone's damage to all 3 of the enemies that are currently on the field. Now we get to Morgan Le Fay's second skill, and this is a targetable charge skill. This is partially what makes Morgan Le Fay so versatile. So not only does she have the ability to obviously charge herself with this, turning her into a 50% charger, our first Berserker 50% charger that we had as an AoE. So really nice for her in that regard, but it's also going to increase the party's NP gen rate for 3 turns by up to 25%. Not bad. It's not quite Castoria level there, but it's still very good and really nice, and all on a low cooldown of 5 turns. So given the fact that this skill is targetable, it does mean too that especially if you're in some sort of invincible comp, like say with Castoria, Morgan, and Merlin, that you can basically shift the 20% to whichever one of these other units you might need to get to their NP. Maybe Merlin gets there easy. In fact, I've kind of noticed this, that typically in an invincible comp, if you're able to run something like Prisma on your supports, Merlin tends to get there sort of just naturally, because yeah, you'll occasionally get the card, you'll occasionally get the triple arch chain, you'll have the charge skills, but Merlin still has his passive trait that gives him charge per turn on top of everything else, and that does tend to add up and help him out over time. So in that regard, I tend to either be using the charge skill on Morgan herself, or even the Castoria to help catch her up to get her to her NP in time in order to allow you to be covered. Because one of the things you don't want to have is lapses in coverage in the invincible comp, sort of any turn in a 3-turn cadence where maybe you aren't covered by the solemn defense that Castoria is providing. That's going to open you up to damage, and that's going to make things rough, but Morgan Le Fay does have a solution to that. So let's go look at Arjuna Alter's second skill now as a result. He gets Clairvoyance Transcendental EX, and again, Transcendental, and he gets the critical star absorption of Buster cards for 3 turns. So this is going to make his Buster cards even more Oonga Boonga, even more damaging, even more firepower basically for him. So he already has that attack up. He already has that, again, sort of power mod that he has whenever a debuff is applied to the enemy. But then, boom, on top of this, you get 6,000 absorption to Buster cards, which is really nice. That's something that, again, he definitely wants, because as a Berserker, you do not have very high star absorption. You only have 9. And when you consider a lot of classes out there have 100 plus, this makes it very difficult to absorb any amount of stars from anyone else on the field if you're a Berserker. So one of the solutions has always been to flood the party with stars and basically get too much. But another one of those has also been to just instead basically use a powerful star absorption. And we started to see these come out here over the past couple of years where they've realized, hey, yeah, if we're going to make a star absorption skill on a Berserker, on an Avenger, one of those classes that really sucks with that, we're going to need to make it hefty. And so that's what you see here, 6,000%. This will be enough to actually soak the stars, and doubly so it's only to his Buster card, so you know it's going to be on the damage dealing ones. The sad part might be maybe you wanted it on something like the Arts card in order to get an Arts crit to charge him back in time. That's going to be one of the downsides to this, is only the Buster cards, but still not the worst of downsides. It's definitely something you can manage with if you know how to play your cards right. On top of that, he also gets the 30% charge, and it's all on a 5-turn cooldown. So very similar, you saw Morgan Le Fay had the 30% off of her first skill. Here's Arjuna Alter's 30%. Now, looking at his third skill here, he grants himself Gut status, 1 time 3 turns. It's not a huge amount of coverage. This is basically the bare minimum amount that we get from a lot of Guts, but still, it's better to have a Guts than not. It's at least some level of hard protection from dying in his case. And again, he will revive with at least 2,000 HP, which is not the best. That is fairly anemic, but he does recover his own HP every turn for 3 turns, up to 2,000 at rank 10. So again, you would be looking at potentially 6,000 HP worth of healing. The only question is, if he's already been hit down to nothing, are you able to prevent more damage from occurring to him at that point? That's going to be your big concern, but certainly if you're running him in a party comp with, like, again, like let's say Castoria and Merlin, just like with Morgan, maybe you have enough coverage there. Maybe you can protect him for long enough to actually allow this healing to come into effect. Doubly so if you've got that Merlin NP healing on top of him. So this is still nice. I'd prefer to have the healing, rather than not have it at all. But certainly Maybe something like a dodge or an invuln might have even been better in his case, but still, really, really nice. Definitely glad he has this. So that is his gut skill, and it's all on a 7-turn cooldown. Morgan Le Fay gets a gut skill, and it's a doozy. There's a lot going on in this. It's also 1 time 3 turns, so again, not the best duration. It's also going to increase her critical star absorption for 3 turns by 5,000%. Not quite Arjuna Alter 6,000. Doesn't matter. It's still enough in most cases. And unlike Arjuna Alter's, hers absorbs it to all her cards. So maybe you would want it specifically on the Buster cards, but there are times, especially given the fact that Morgan Le Fay has those 2 arts cards, that, yeah, I have absolutely taken advantage of really good arts crits on Morgan Le Fay and watched her NP just skyrocket, just go right back to full because of that. So there are some really good aspects to having this, and I actually do like the fact and kind of prefer it that it's not specific to one card type. Granted, you still need enough cards to actually cover people, but that is one of the concerns I think that people have over time. Now, she's also going to increase her own critical damage for 3 turns by up to 30%. So Arjuna Alter didn't have any sort of crit damage. But if you remember, that's kind of why, is because he has the power mod against those debuffed enemies. So Arjuna Alter's attacks are just going to be dealing damage as long as that first skill is active for him. So even when he crits, those crits will hit harder as well. So giving her something, even though she doesn't have that power mod necessarily, definitely helps her out in that regard for just general purpose carding. On top of this, this also grants her a regeneration buff for 3 turns. Kind of similar to Arjuna if you think about it. But what this one does is it reduces all enemies' attack 1 turn every turn for 3 turns. So basically each turn a pulse goes out on all the enemies that will reduce their attack for 1 turn by up to 20%. On top of this, it happens every single turn for 3 turns. So for the next 3 turns, your enemies will keep getting their attack reduced, which is nice. And it also means that basically it's not going to be this thing that, oh, they can just cleanse it right off, because it'll just reapply the next turn. It's also going to reduce their critical attack chance 1 turn every turn for 3 turns. So same deal here. So they will have even less odds of being able to crit, which is really, really nice. One of the things I really like about Morgan Le Fay is this critical attack chance reduction that they have is definitely going to make them able to crit against her less. And that is something that you're always going to be worried about as a Berserker, is that one stray crit killing you. Morgan Le Fay has the ability to actually reduce the enemy's capability of doing that. So that's really nice in that regard, and it's on top of her survival skill already. So I actually think this is a fairly good pairing. And then to top it off, it also acts as a star bomb. So again, she gets 15 stars at rank 10 here, basically all on the same turn cooldown as Arjuna Alter there at 7 turns. So really a nice survival skill. Obviously the cooldowns feel a little bit long, but gut skills tend to have longer cooldowns. So in that regard, I gotta give the gut skill basically to her, assuming you have the protection, because you don't want to have to leave things to chance with healing over time and stuff like that. This is definitely going to be a little bit more of a preventative guts rather than a responsive one like Arjuna Alter's is. But again, there may be some situations where Arjuna Alter's wins out. It just depends on what you're going for. So again, that's both of their kits. Let's look at their passive skills here. So this is again Morgan Le Fay. She's got Madness Enhancement B for Buster Performance of 8%. This is probably just due to help out the 2 Buster cards she has instead of having 3 like your typical Berserker. She gets Magic Resistance A of Debuff Resistance 20% there. So again, further reducing the odds of you getting debuffed if you're using her. She gets Debuff Success Rate of 12%. It's actually really nice. It's just going to help her defense down land on that first skill on the enemy. So really good that she has that. Territory Creation B is another really odd one here, but this is just going to make her arts cards perform even better. It's going to make that NP gain when using them even better as well. And then Fey Eyes A. This is going to increase her own critical attack chance resistance by 20%. Now, the thing to think about with this is that 20% is another reduction that she constantly carries with her. So enemies just naturally have minus 20% chance to crit against her. add in the minus 20% effect from her guts, and you're now at a minus 40% chance. This is enough to prevent most enemies in the game from just naturally critting. Obviously, you can get enemies that get crit rate up, but there will be, quite a bit of shenanigans that an enemy is going to have to pull in order to be able to land a successful crit against Morgan. And that's one of the ways that she is kind of sneaky tanky a little bit for a berserker. She's not going to be able to weather a storm, but certainly that does help her staying power quite a bit. So really, really nice. And now let's go look at Arjuna Alter's passives. He doesn't get a lot, but he is one of the only berserkers out there that has Madness Enhancement EX. So he gets even more Buster performance by 12%. It's kind of crazy because most of the other ones that have it, as far as I know, are actually berserker units that do not have triple Buster decks. They only have double Buster decks, and that's typically why they have such high Madness Enhancement. So really, really nice there that he actually has it with a triple Buster deck, because that's just going to mean that he is sort of that gold standard for Buster carding in that regard. Then he also gets Divinity EX for just an additional 250 flat damage added. So again, the way to understand Divinity is if you had an attack that would have dealt something like 10,000 damage, instead now it's going to deal 10,250 damage. It is just a flat attack added at the end of everything, and it's nice, but it's not a end-all be-all. Now looking at the append skills, obviously you have the extra attack finesse improvement. Now, that's going to be the same for both these first two on both Morgan Le Fay and Arjuna Alter. So the way to think about it is, how much are you going to be soloing with these units? I'd say I have seen some Arjuna Alter solos. I have seen some times where there were gimmick clears of trying to get a Buster Brave Chain with him with the right command codes. So in that regard, something like the extra attack finesse might have a little bit more of an edge on him as opposed to Morgan Le Fay, because I don't see that as often with Morgan. But there are times where Morgan is kind of put on an island and expected to deal the damage. Doubly so if you're running her in a double support sort of setup where she's kind of your primary damage healer. So still you have a lot of advantage that you can gain from that extra attack finesse. And don't forget the fact that it's not just damage that gets added, it's also NP gain and star gen. So really nice that applies to basically every aspect of your extra attack. Now the second skill, mana loading. This is a really interesting one. In Morgan Le Fay's case, she is obviously a 50% charger. So she's someone that basically can use her 50%, and then as we start, using her in a double Koyan Skya setup, for instance, she can get back to that and get both those skills back. What's weird is in a lot of cases you might not need it. Maybe you either don't have to use the mana loading because you already had used the 20% charge in her kit, or maybe you unlock and max the mana loading, and that way you basically don't have to use the charge skill on her. Either way, I'm going to say that mana loading on either of these units is probably the first thing you should get. It is super nice to have. Really, 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 really good. In Morgan Le Fay's case, we have talked about this before. A 50% charger can basically take a non-MLB event CE that has 30% charge on it and, use their 50% skills. That'll bring them up to 80, and then having the mana loading would be 100%. So 50% chargers do have that small little bit of edge in some events where they can go from 30 to full that a 30% charger couldn't rather. But the issue at play here is that basically a 50%er and a 30%er roughly are probably their best case scenario is starting with a nice MLB 50% charge C. Something like aerial drive, something like cranking. One of those is going to be really, really nice for them to use. And sadly, a lot of the 50% charging Buster units cannot touch Black Grail. So you're looking instead at starting them with that next best thing, which is going to be those 50% Cs. So in that regard, maybe again, the mana loading might have a little bit more impact to Arjuna Alter because he's going to need that to start from 50. Morgan Le Fay wouldn't. But again, really just depends on how you're starting their setup. Doubly so if you're using them in something like the Invincible comp. You're going to be wanting to basically use them with something like a Black Grail or Honey Lake or something which doesn't have charge on them. So you're going to be wanting as much charge out of the outset as you can get. So Mana loading's really strong on both. And then we start looking at the third skill. So on Arjuna Alter, this is his critical attack chance resistance against archer enemies. I'm not the hugest fan of the third append on any of our berserkers, and the reason for that is because this is a very selective niche thing. If you're going up against an archer, then sure, this could actually be nice. It is a whopping 30% reduction, and with the way, critical chance tends to work on the enemies, a lot of it is a very block thing where it kind of works in increments of 10. So having a 30% chance reduction is huge. That being said, you have to be specifically facing an archer for it to actually pay off. So this is why I think it's the weakest of the three appends that basically you could pick on your berserker. That being said, if you have the spare coins, if you've rolled a lot, or maybe we're somewhere down the line where coins are now free for everybody, woohoo, wouldn't be the worst thing. It's just not the best thing either. Now, I think however much we can point that out in Arjuna Alter's case, this is extra redundant in Morgan Le Fay's case. We already established the fact that she has minus 40% right there just off of her two skills. Add in another 30%, and that puts her at minus 70%. There is no unit in the game, I believe, that has enough without stacking buffs in order to overcome this. So basically, nobody has the latent crit chance in order to be able to overcome that. You don't really need it. At 40%, you're already more than most units' latent crit chance. So at that point, I'm going to tell you that, yeah, this is probably just worthless and a waste of your coins in most cases for Morgan Le Fay. But again, if you want to perfect Morgan Le Fay, go for it. Now let's look at, actually, we'll start with Arjuna Alter's Noble Phantasm here. So kind of taking a look at this, he's got a 5-hit AoE NP. Now, it basically is just a really straightforward one. It deals damage to all enemies. But the overcharge effect is that it reduces their buster resistance for 3 turns activating first. This is actually the exact same thing as Karna, only it applies before damage. In Karna's case, it applies after, and that's one of the reasons that Karna kind of gets screwed by that. But in Arjuna Alter's case, it activates first. So not only does he get 3 turns of buster resist down, this counts as a debuff for the enemy. So this is where he provides his own debuff as part of his kit in order to be able to proc extra damage on things. That is really, really nice. And something that I think is just really awesome about him. Now, like I explained though, you're gonna have to be worried about anything resisting that, or again, something that's debuff immune and he can't apply it. If that's the case, his damage is gonna tank a lot. Not only because he's gonna be losing that 50% power mod, but because he probably also is losing that 20% buster resist down that goes out before his NP. So yeah, you're looking at a roughly, and again, these are not accurate numbers, but a roughly 70% damage swing there. That's kind of nutty. So that is why his damage will kind of just absolutely tank if you can't apply the debuffs. But again, you can try to use supports in a creative way to apply more debuffs. You could also try using, command codes and stuff like that, or mystic codes if you think that they'll get the job done. Just keep in mind there's numerous other ways to get around Arjuna Alter's problem, but the one way in which he can't get around it is if the target is debuff immune. So again though, the fact that it's a 20% reduction, the only other bad part about this that I could say is that it wouldn't be carried between waves, but still, you don't care, Arjuna Alter hits really hard. With Morgan Le Fay, we look at her and she has a 6-hit AoE NP. It increases her own damage against round table or Fey enemies by 50% for 1 turn. This is a power mod, and the way you can tell is because it has the 1 turn duration. It's not specific to the NP. This means that this does impact her carding. So if you're facing round table knights or Fey, then yeah, she's kind of got that 50% power mod just like Arjuna Alter does. And it does impact not only her NP, but her cards as well. The only downside is it's just the 1 turn duration, so it's basically as you use the NP and any cards after, otherwise it falls off. So you don't get to keep that for multiple turns. It then deals damage to all enemies, and it inflicts a curse status of 1,000 damage for 5 turns to them. This isn't the greatest thing, but hey, it's 5,000 extra damage over a 5-turn duration. In farming, we probably don't care. In challenge content, this can add up over time. And then probably the low-key best part about her NP besides the damage, the overcharge of the party's NP by one stage, one time over 3 turns. This is such a significant little thing on her NP because this is one of the major mechanisms that helps drive that invincible comp that I keep talking about. The invincible comp functions in a way in which Morgan Le Fay's NP fires off first, then you have Merlin's NP firing off second, and then you have Castoria's NP firing off third. And the reason you do Castoria third is, well, yes, she can give the attack up to Morgan Le Fay. Putting her third in the sequence here basically puts her at an automated 300% charge, or overcharge rather. So this is getting you even more stacks of solemn defense by placing her third in the chain. Now, add in an overcharge buff for everybody, and this means that Morgan Le Fay's NP goes off at overcharge rank 2, Merlin's NP goes off at overcharge rank 3, and Castoria's now goes off at overcharge rank 4. That's pretty nutty, and that's without charging them to like 200% or something like that. So really, really a nice sneaky buff there that gets Castoria even more stacks in that. And certainly this can be nice for her on subsequent looping, because again, you guys can see here, Morgan Le Fay's own overcharge is extra damage against the man attribute. And this is super effective damage. This means that it is multiplicative with every other type of buff. That's really, really nice. It doesn't mean it's additive in any way, shape, or form like a power mod might be with, say, NP damage. Instead, super effective is its own thing, and it is multiplicative with everything, which is exactly what you want. It will hit hard whenever she is facing man attribute enemies. This is the upside to Morgan Le Fay. It is also the downside. Just like Arjuna Alter has the downside if he's facing debuff immune enemies, Morgan Le Fay is going to have an issue if she's not facing man-traded enemies. Doubly so when you start considering using her with someone like Koyanskaya that also gives man trade. So you have even more power mod that can stack on top of the super effective multiplicatively there. So really, really nice at 150%. And again, if you're doing it on a subsequent run there with the overcharge already on her, then yeah, you're looking at 162.5%. Not a huge increase, but hey, it's more damage. So in that regard, Morgan Le Fay is really, really nice. And there are a lot of man-traded enemies in this game. Roughly a third of the game is going to end up being man-traded. So that is really, really solid, and that means she's going to deal just extra damage on top of all of that, and she still has the other 2 niches to apply to. Now let's go actually look at the damage numbers here. And remember, this is the NP damage list. It assumes that no external buffs are being applied. It assumes neutral damage, and it assumes basically that all of the unit's own buffs are being applied to them. So don't take this as gospel or any way, shape, or form, but it is always nice to see comparative numbers just to have a little bit of an idea. So you guys can see that this is Arjuna Alter assuming his debuff has applied to the enemy. He is sitting there at a whopping 37k at NP1. He has no special effect that will allow him to deal more damage than that, but the issue that this sheet won't show you is what happens when Arjuna Alter's damage doesn't apply. And that's where I was talking about again. He loses roughly 70% in terms of modifiers, so it's not a pretty picture there. You guys can expect his damage to plummet quite a bit. So that is going to be one of the issues that he'll run into. Now, as you look at Morgan Le Fay, Morgan Le Fay's numbers are a lot more modest at only 24k here for NP1. The good part about her is that, again, she has basically the ability to either get her power mod trait for up to 36k at NP1, the man trait that is super effective for 40k, and then even the combination of the two, should it arise, definitely, something like that, and say Camelot might be a thing, where, again, you can get up to 60k just with an NP1. So she has a lot more upward mobility in terms of that damage output, but certainly if it's not being applied, then you're looking at only the 24k. Granted, these numbers might seem low, but hey, remember, you're going to be effective. Every Berserker is going to be dealing at least the 1.5 times damage to everybody. So that is going to be nice. That is going to at least be a decent chunk of damage there that you guys can add on top of this. Plus, any sort of, better craft essences, mystic codes, or supports, and their buffs that you can bring to the table to really amplify them. And that works for both Morgan Le Fay and Arjuna Alter. Both of them can get a lot stronger. So, again, it's up to you to determine which one you really want. Do you want to roll for Arjuna Alter now and risk rolling, risk being able to roll at the middle of the year for some of those really good supports? Or do you want to roll for Morgan Le Fay then and also have the same issue, or maybe put off rolling for either of these two units? Arjuna Alter does get another banner next year during the Chaldea Boys raid-up. And then similarly, Morgan Le Fay, I think it's no, secret at this point that Morgan Le Fay's had 4 banners since her launch on JP. So she definitely has some, including one right after, basically, Lost Belt 3 is kind of coming to a conclusion there. So you guys can expect at least another opportunity to roll Morgan if that's what you're after. But again, both of them are really nice. Both of them can be very high damaging. So it's just, do you want more of a damage edge at Arjuna Alter, or do you want that party-wide versatility and sort of kit out of Morgan Le Fay? That's up to you. I'll let you make that choice. But I hope you enjoyed my analysis of both these units side by side. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.